I want to take some time and let's go through the four most common types of fluke parasites that we come across in the medical field. If you ever want to go and work with some of these third world countries to help out with medicine, to help out with the CDC. One of the things that you're going to come across a lot of, especially in these areas where often they don't have access to clean drinking water, is you're going to find that fluke parasites are actually pretty common there. And there are four big ones that we really kind of have to worry about because they can kill thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people a year. And we divide these four flukes into two different groups, and they're called schistosomins and non-schistosomins. And so each of the ones you can see up here on the screen, we're going to take a look at and talk about essentially what diseases they cause, what are the symptoms, and what are some of the treatments that you'll give them. So the four big ones are the Chinese liver fluke, the intestinal fluke, the lung fluke, and the blood fluke. And so all of these actually have humans as their definitive host. So let's just look at the first of the non-schistosomins. So let's look at the Chinese or the Oriental liver fluke. So it's the third most prevalent worm in the world. That's saying something. And in 2015, over 50 million humans were infected. You have to forgive me on these Latin words. Clonorchis sinensis is the scientific name. So we cause the disease caused by this species, clonorchiasis, and essentially that's the name of the disease. So we just kind of tie the two together. By the way, the word sinensis literally means Chinese in Latin. So if you ever see sinensis is used a lot. So if you ever see sinensis, just know it's talking about the Orient or it's talking about China. So what are some of the symptoms of having a liver fluke? Well, you can imagine it's going to be some liver symptoms, right? So mostly, however, it's asymptomatic. People just do not show symptoms. But when they do, the little bit of the symptoms they'll show is inflammation, obstruction of the bile ducts. That causes jaundice. So the bile ducts is your liver produces bile, which is a slippery, slimy material that essentially helps coat your intestines and helps your fecal matter push through. It's just that welcome to biology is what it is. When that production is off or gets blocked up, one of the conditions that it can cause is called jaundice. Now, you've probably heard of jaundice before. It's something that's very common in newborns. You just take them back into the hospital to give them a treatment, and they're fine. It can also cause abdominal pains, obviously, nausea, diarrhea, weight loss. Pretty much all common things that happen whenever you get any type of illness. But some of the chronic things that can happen are edema and cryosis of the liver, and it can lead to cholangiocarcinoma, which is essentially bile duct cancer. So this little guy gets into your bile duct, he backs it up, he damages some of the cells. The cells can lead to cancer. Cirrhosis is simply the death of the cells. So yeah, you don't want your cells dying, you don't want this guy in there. So this guy can cause a problem, right? Definitely cause a problem. So what are some things we can do to help with it? First of all, the detection is essentially done by genetics test. There's different things you can test for. The genetics is often the easiest one. So the PCR test, the LAMP test, and the ELISA test are three of the big genetic tests you can do to see if you actually are infected. And another easy one you can do is just look for presence of eggs in the fecals. Having worked in zoos before, whenever an animal gets transferred to a zoo, and whenever he's leaving the zoo he came from, they'll go into quarantine for a minimum of a month. And so the rule is you need to have a minimum of 3 clean fecals. And so you have to wait a week and then check. If the first fecal is cool, then you wait another week and check. It's cool, wait another week and check. It's cool, but then you want to make sure you get to that 1 month period. If you still haven't had 3 clean fecals after a month, they have to stay in quarantine and get treatment until they get 3 clean fecals before you ship them out. Now, when the new zoo gets that same animal, they go into quarantine at the new zoo, and we wait until 3 clean fecals. So checking fecals is actually a pretty good way to see if something is infected with any type of worms. And then there's treatments you can give them, which are essentially vermicides. Here are the 2 big ones. I'm not even going to try to pronounce these. There are short terms, terminology that we can use for the names, but here's the entire name. But these are 2 very common vermicides that are actually given for a bunch of different reasons, but it usually is really good for any type of parasite that you have. So we'll actually see these a lot as we go through. So this is the Oriental liver fluke, or the Chinese liver fluke, and just familiarize yourself with it a little bit. So let's move on to the, this is the diagram of its life cycle. Nothing special about it. It follows along with everything else that we've seen. So you can take a look at it and see what makes it differ from everything else. Obviously, it's going to end the liver. So here's a non-schistosoman fluke as well. So this is going to be the intestinal fluke. So you imagine it's going to cause some intestinal distress. So it is the largest intestinal fluke in the world. It's about 75 millimeters long. It's actually pretty visible. They're actually pretty big. And in 2015, infected 10 million humans worldwide. Here's the name of its disease. And here is the symptoms. So mostly asymptomatic, doesn't really cause any problems. But when it does start causing problems, you can have allergic reactions to it. Anemia, which is essentially low energy. Pale skin, ascites, stomach aches, obstruction of the bowels, which is not going to be fun. Skin swelling in the face and legs. Ascites, I think, is water retention, and that will lead to all kinds of fun stuff happening to your body when you start retaining water. So none of this stuff is good. None of this stuff is good. So diagnosis for this guy is simply presence of the eggs and feces. Because they're so large, you don't need to do the other test. You can actually see the eggs in feces. And the same thing, treatments, we get the same vermicides as we had before. So again, if any of the symptoms have anything to do with the intestines or swelling, swelling in the skin and the face and the legs, that generally has to do with the intestinal fluke. So you don't want to get this guy either. Same thing, another diagram for its life cycle, and we can kind of see how it differs. Mostly because this will end up inside of the intestines. And here's our last type of non-schistosoman fluke. So this is the lung fluke. So with the lung fluke, this one's a little bit more, I don't want to say deadly, but because it's in the lungs, it has its own kind of description and symptoms that you'll see. So it is the most common of 10 species that cause lung infections. In 2015, over 20 million people suffered from this. Some of the symptoms are cough, fever, hives, abdominal pain, diarrhea, and eosinophilia. Eosinophilia, I believe, is coughing up. It's not coughing up blood. It is coughing up basically pus. It's coughing up the white blood cells that are fighting the infection. So essentially, you'll cough and you'll have pus. Not a lot, but you'll be able to see there. Obviously, there'll be pus in your cough. Now, if this gets worse, we go into the chronic conditions, which is pulmonary manifestations. So you'll have probably labored breathing, problems breathing, dyspnea, which is, I believe, fluid in the lungs, and hemoptysis, which is actually coughing up blood. Diagnosis and treatments. Again, just look for eggs, but in this, you're going to check in the sputum, which is the stuff that you cough up. The eggs are actually red-brown in color, so if there's bleeding, it may be hard to see, but if you're just coughing up pus, then they're a little bit easier to see. The treatments are the same thing, those 2 vermicides that we've looked at before. So again, just give somebody these 2 types of vermicides, and you're curing them for a lot of different things already. So that's the lung fluke. And here's how this guy is moved around. You can see all kinds of fun things go on there, but we don't want that guy in our lungs. So the last one we're going to look at is a schistosemin fluke. So this is going to be our blood fluke. So it's the world's second most socioeconomic devastating disease. The first one being malaria. So this guy's actually pretty bad. You do not want to get this. In 2015, 250 million humans worldwide were infected with this, and 200,000 actually died from this that year. Most of these were in Africa and Brazil. So what are the symptoms of this? Abdominal pain is a cute one, diarrhea, having blood in your stool, hematuria, which is blood in your urine. So you want to watch out for those things. Some of the chronic diseases are hepatic and renal failure. So hepatic is liver, renal is kidneys. So your kidneys and your liver start shutting down, which is not a fun way to go. Because of the reproductive cycle, they can of these particular flukes, they can cause infertility in males and females. They can cause bladder carcinoma, which is cancer in the bladder, and gastrointestinal diseases. So you're just going to have a bad time all around with these guys. Because they're a blood fluke, they do get into the blood, but in order for, and that's kind of where they live, and they just absorb nutrients straight from your bloodstream. When it's time to reproduce, though, sometimes they'll migrate, and then when they migrate, they want to get to an exit point in the body. And if you're in the blood, one of the easiest ways to get to, places to get to is actually the bladder. So once they get into your bladder, well, then they can reproduce, and the eggs will be removed from your body whenever you urinate. So once they're there, they generally stay there in your bladder, and that's why they can cause things like infertility, because they can cause blockages in the area surrounding your bladder, which is generally around the genitals for humans. So you'd have to watch out for that. So one of the easiest ways to tell if you have them is to do an ELISA test, which is a DNA test, and then also looking for presence of eggs in the stool, because sometimes they can get into your digestive tract, and they can also look for a presence of the eggs in urine. And we have a slightly different treatment. So we have that same the P word for the treatment, which is one of the vermicides, but there's another one which has oxymequin. We'll go with that, and that's another vermicide, but it's different because this is dealing more with blood stuff. So this will actually help flush them out of your blood system.